Hi, welcome back to another episode of Soul Pod Studio. I'm Amy Farrell and I'm joining from the Bay Area of California. Today, I'm delighted to have Ali Clunies-Ross join us all the way from Sydney, Australia. Ali is a portfolio manager with Artesian, an investment management firm that invests in debt and venture capital across Asia Pacific. Ali is specifically focused on the firm's clean energy and clean tech venture capital funds, and she's also the lead portfolio manager of their Female Leaders Fund. This is a fund that invests in high-growth, women-led startups. I'm really excited to get Ali's insights on the region and also learn more about the companies that she meets every day that are tackling global challenges such as scalable access to renewable energy, textile waste, healthcare, food insecurity, and equality, among others. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ali.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Ali, how did you get into venture capital, and what is it that attracted you to working with founders?
So I guess I started off looking at the technology sector when I was finishing my undergrad, and I did a course called regulation and law, which is a big stretch to tech and VC. And then I wrote a research paper on how regulation impacts innovation within a country and focused on, obviously, the Australian legal system. Australia, I don't know if you know, or maybe your listeners don't know, that often is referred to as a nanny state. We have a lot of, pretty strong laws, regulation, and it was talking about how that impacts technology and the commercialization within Australia. And so from there, I started looking at, tech investments. I'd done a business degree. And when I was starting my master's, I started as an intern at Artesian and was doing international environmental law as part of my master's, one of the subjects I was doing there. So started to kind of unravel into this, tech, climate, environmental piece. And I guess technology is one of the levers. Obviously, regulation is one that is being pulled, but technology and new innovations is a massive lever that we need to pull to get to our net zero transition. And, countries obviously across the world have net zero targets. And technology is one of the ways that we can solve these big problems of climate change, renewable energy, how to take, a volatile energy source, which is, the sun. It's not reliable because at night, obviously we don't have it. So how can we store that energy? How do we supply food to a growing global population? What will food security look like? What will our food sources look like? So technology is solving all of these problems and, working with some of the smartest people on earth who are PhDs or have done deep research or spend their whole lives researching these issues was really exciting and a total privilege for me to be able to, access this sort of exciting space. So that's how I kind of got into it, and that's why I love what I do.
Oh no, it sounds amazing. I mean, working with founders, as you said, you're working with scientists and individuals who believe so passionately in what they're doing that they'll set out and start a business. You must see and meet so many interesting people from so many different countries. Is there a way to categorize some of the founders? Are there serial entrepreneurs that you come across, or those who come out of, an academic setting, or how would you kind of group the founders that you're meeting?
So I would say it differs on the agnostic tech side compared to, the clean tech, agricultural tech, some of the deeper tech stuff that we do. Often with the deeper tech investments we're making, they are engineers or PhDs or researchers who might have partnered with a business co-founder, which makes a really good team because there's one person who understands the deep tech and then the other person who understands how to commercialize that technology. We're starting to see serial entrepreneurs pop up more and more in Australia across both the agnostic tech, so more software side, where you've got founders that are spinning out of groups like Canva, where we've had some really great success in Australia. And we're starting to see that in climate as well. I had a founder pitch to me last week who he was going through, what his CV and where his experience was from. And he'd actually worked previously at one of our startups. So funnily, I was introduced in a completely different way, but he'd also, worked with one of our startups that's now at its Series C level. So we are starting to see technologists spin out of groups who might be first-time entrepreneurs, but they have that technology and that startup background, as well as, the serial entrepreneurs who are starting multiple businesses over and over, and first-time founders as well. There's still a lot of first-time founders. So it's a real mix, but particularly on the deep tech side, we see a lot of PhDs who might be spinning out their research projects or spinning out IP from a university. And we work with a lot of universities across Australia to ensure that we can access that IP and that new technology. So it's not one size fits all. Every problem, requires a different type of founder, a different background, a different domain expertise. So it's great that we get access and, we're meeting lots of new people, and that helps us help the founders as well, because we can take lots of different ideas, lots of different, business models across the portfolio and sort of help them scale their business.
No, definitely. I mean, I think you've invested in over 600 companies, right?
Yes.
So you have
globally,
globally, that expertise. What if you could just look at some of the differences between female founders, let's say, now that you have and maybe just kind of introduce the new fund, and then also, the technology or those that are coming more from a climate tech perspective. Are there any generalizations you might point out with female founders that's surprising to you, or, caught you off guard?
So I guess to give a little bit of background on the Female Leaders Fund. So we launched this almost 2 years ago now, differently to some of our other sector-focused funds, like our agricultural fund, our energy fund, our medtech fund. The Female Leaders Fund is an agnostic technology fund, so we can invest in any sort of technology. But the core piece of the mandate is looking at the ownership structure of the business and the leadership structure of that business, and ensuring there's equal weighting across men and women. So it doesn't mean that we can't invest in, a male and female founded business. We can, but we want to make sure that equity stake is equal. I think, we've made a couple of investments now in that fund, a mix. So we do have direct to consumer businesses. So, some of the hypotheses when we started, obviously women, particularly across Asia, I think control around 80% of household spending. So, women are solving problems that they faced, and that might be medical, it might be financial, it might be from an education point of view, it might be a direct-to-consumer business where they haven't been able to access something. We actually found, and we definitely have direct-to-consumer businesses in the portfolio, there was a huge amount of medical tech companies that we found. So a lot of doctors, researchers who were solving medical problems for women. So that might be childbirth, endometriosis, general health issues for the heart, etc. So we have seen, a really broad range of technologies across that business. So it's been really exciting. I guess the genesis of that fund is that, as I'm sure a lot of people know, less than 3% of global venture funding goes to female-only led businesses. 95% of decision makers in venture firms are men. So we really wanted to open up. We have a predominantly female investment team, so we wanted to make sure that we were putting the right investors in front of problems that might resonate with us. That might not necessarily be the case, but there have been cases where I've said, oh my God, I would definitely use that, or I do use that, or I know that brand, or I've specifically sought out brands that I know or new things that I've seen or my friends are talking about, and reached out to those founders. And that might not have been something that my male counterpart might have been, without making generalizations. I don't like to necessarily make generalizations, but our goal with this fund is to show that investing in diversity creates outperformance.
Sure. No, I mean, and thank you so much for what you're doing. Hopefully that 3% can change with your fund and others who follow you. So, you talked a little bit about how you're finding the companies, but I'm sure you have a lot of inbound inquiries. How many companies do you meet with, like, on an annual basis? And how do you sort through that and really identify what makes the most sense for your investment thesis?
Yeah, so it's around 1,000 investments, give or take, in a year that we're kind of reviewing. So high volume. We're looking at obviously the Asia Pac region, so it's a pretty big geographical spread. We have a deal flow team who sort of manage that and are reviewing all of the decks, all of the inbound, which might be warm or cold. So we have a lot of people who come through our network and get warm introductions, as well as through our website. I guess there's a lot of screens that we put on those. We are a B Corp, so we are, an impact and sustainable investor. We, while we still have the same financial returns as a traditional VC fund, we have that extra layer of kind of sustainability that we're putting on. So we, at minimum, have negative screens on things. We're not investing in weapons, tobacco, all the kind of bad things. But we also have positive screens. So looking at, is this a renewable energy technology? Is this helping health tech? Is this, so what is the, net benefit to society as well? And then because we've got a lot of funds, we're obviously looking at the mandates of each funds. We know what stage might fit, what mandate each individual fund has, what targets on an impact level they have. So all of those elements come through as well. And then finally, well, not finally, but also another very important bucket is this a venture business? Can this scale? How will this business succeed? Do we think that this is the right team to help it succeed? If all those things are looking good, yeah, we'll take a first-time meeting, because obviously you can't get the return and you can't get the impact if the business isn't able to scale and, have a large footprint. So there's a lot of different sort of filters that we're putting on things, and we have, a team that are doing that on a daily basis, and then it sort of moves through the process. You meet lots of different people along the way, depending on what the business is and what they're doing.
I'm sure that's one of your strengths, because you have to meet so many different people who are operating so many different types of businesses. And so if you're listening to pitches all day long and trying to identify those that meet all of your different criteria, that takes a certain skill. And I can see in your personality that you're probably very excited to hear about what's coming, what people have identified as a problem or a challenge that they want to fix, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, founders are the most exciting people. Like, for somebody to quit their job and, stop their steady income and their salary and go, I'm going to tackle this big, huge problem, and I'm starting from nothing to grow it into something major, it's super impressive. It's super exciting. I mean, the founders that we're working with are sort of deep experts in their area. You're always learning something new from them. You know, I'm always the dumbest in the room.
No, I wouldn't say that.
I have a different skill set. I'm going like, you guys are, wow, this like research you've done. It's so impressive. But yeah, you can't also help but feel hopeful as well for the future, because I know that there's so much in the world going on, you know, broadly beyond environmental things, wars, and there's often a lot of negativity around the environment. We're not going to hit, you know, 1.5 degrees increase. You know, how are we going to do this? Countries aren't hitting their targets, etc. But then when you're sitting all day long meeting people who are battery material scientists, or, you know, have deep expertise in, you know, carbon capture or soil carbon sequestration, you can't help but think, oh my God, there's so many people in the world doing so many amazing things. Surely, you know, if we all keep working together and keep building these companies, we'll have a good outcome for the world. So
Yes,
it is,
yes.
as I said,
Very
it's
hopeful.
a privileged job. Yes, yes.
Yeah. No, and actually I wanted to touch a little bit on the types of investing in the climate fund, because of those you mentioned, they sound a bit more capital intensive. They're not your typical SaaS, right? And
No.
maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the companies that you have and why your investment thesis, you believe that, you know, hardware might be a very important contributor. Whereas, you know, sitting in Silicon Valley, I can tell you that there are certainly a lot of venture funds that are looking at software solutions. I'm sure we need a mix, but just from your experience and in Asia Pacific in particular, are you seeing some really neat innovations on the hardware side?
Yeah, so I think so we do hardware deep tech. So it could also be like a biology element as well. So like in the natural capital. But there is a role for both to play. But to transition and make that energy transition, we need new infrastructure projects and, you know, better battery systems and lower cost solar and waste to energy solutions. So software can't solve everything, and neither can hardware. Hardware is great at doing the thing, but software can optimize that, and there's a lot of sort of layers. So working together, I think that, you know, there have been really exciting. I mean, to give you an example, one of our companies is called Sakona. So they're a battery material technology. So this company spun out of the University of Wollongong, which is a university on just south of Sydney. They, you know, started as kind of a pre-seed deal. They had a founder or two founders and the IP, and they had to go from there. And they followed, you know, a similar path to a lot of the deep tech companies, where they do lab testing, they get the lab results, then they validate that works. Then they go to the next stage, which is a pilot plant. So showing that they can do it at a larger volume, maybe in the kilograms of volume. Then they might provide those to customers. Then they'd go to a commercial plant. Then they'd have like large offtake agreements, you know, then go from there. They might build more and more. So it's not developing a software, and you can't distribute deep tech on the internet. You have to understand import and export, taxation across different countries, you know, the regulation within those different countries. How am I going to actually logistically transport it from here to there? So it's very complicated, and it is more complex in some ways, but it's a necessary part for what we think the impact that, you know, that our companies can create, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions and creating that energy transition.
That's really helpful. Do you mind just talking a little bit about the natural capital?
Yeah.
You were saying that some solutions coming out of Asia, I think you're seeing more on kind of the biology side. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, we see America, Australia and the US. Obviously, the US is a humongous market, and a lot of the companies from Australia often go to the US. That's their kind of natural next market. In Asia, they are markets themselves. So, if you look at Indonesia, it's a huge, I think it's like 270 million people, and probably got that wrong, give or take, but, a massive market. They have, for example, 35 to 40 million people working in agriculture.
Mm.
To put that in perspective with the US, it's around 3.54 million people who are employed on farms, fisheries, sort of that like for like. So there's a huge number of people in Indonesia working on rural local farms. Indonesia's sort of, it's around $106 billion a year industry. In the States, it's 3.7 trillion.
Okay.
So already you can see different problems that would emerge in those two markets. So, the US is talking about like larger scale precision agricultural technologies. I guess on the natural capital side, we have a company called Loam. Sorry, it used to be, had a different name before. Loam, that raised $100 million in Australia recently, the largest agricultural deal. They are doing soil carbon sequestration. They're focused on the US market, the Australian market. When we look at something like with Indonesia in agriculture, they have labor challenges. It's more around like marketplace. It's cooperative access for collective purchasing. So it's a different problem set. So there are different types of technologies that kind of emerge from those markets, despite them, having a huge population. They're very different. So I don't know if that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It really does, because we've
Sounded
heard
that way.
no, it definitely does. And we've heard so much more about, nature-based solutions, and what you touched on, those certainly are examples around carbon sequestration, for example, with the company that's operating in the US. I guess, how do you see your role at Artesian in bringing small businesses or startup businesses to larger markets? Like when you just kind of explain the differences between the US and Australian markets versus, the markets in Southeast Asia. Are you helping the portfolio companies as they grow? And maybe you can also touch on where you come in. I think it's seed to Series C sometimes. Is that right?
Yeah. So we come in usually seed, pre-series A, series A is our initial check. And we're following on into, up to series B, series C in our companies. We have an office in New York. So we have a team in New York who are helping our companies on the ground there, helping make the connections. It's obviously a great sort of launch pad for a lot of our companies to go and work in those offices, etc. And we always at a certain point try to ensure that our companies have a follow-on investor. So it might be at Series A, Series B, Series C in the market in which they're trying to launch. So we think that's important because then they have the on-the-ground connections. One of our companies, 5B, which is a rapid solar deployment company, they have investment from BP Ventures and AES. And those two groups obviously are global, but headquartered in the UK and in the US, can help more broadly on the ground there and help that company grow into those markets. So, yeah, we have a lot of network. I mean, a lot of VC job is kind of helping your startup get access to customers, investment, advice, talent, all of those different things, helping them obviously think about their operations, etc., but also making sure that we can network them into the right people so that they have the right support at the right time in their journey.
Sure, to scale, of course. But as a sustainable investor and a B Corp, impact is also important to you. I know you mentioned earlier that's one of the criteria that you look at. How do you help founders and early businesses think about sustainability and integrate it? I mean, they're trying to run their business. Obviously, they're solving, world challenges, but how can they incorporate sustainability and how do you help them with that?
Yeah, so I think from the straight away when we invest, our reporting includes a whole lot of things about sustainable practices. So, hiring, questions on hiring processes, questions on carbon abatement, carbon footprint. Some of them may be relevant to some companies, maybe not so much, but it starts to get the companies, even if they can't answer all of the questions, and they often can't at a seed level. It could be 10 people in the company. They're not tracking their carbon footprint yet. So, there is a bit of realism on what stage that they're at, but we think that starting to get them into those practices and asking them those questions allows them to put the foundations in for when they are a big company, that they've been doing it from the start. So it's kind of, it's similar to what we think about with the Female Leaders Fund. There's a top-down approach where there's a lot of, superannuation or pension funds saying, if we're going to invest in your company, you have to have certain, board targets for women. Same things, the NASDAQ, different stock exchanges around the world have putting in sort of diversity targets. So that's obviously for large organizations that are already listed, that are already big. That's important. But then from the bottom-up approach, by creating every new company that's emerging and the future Amazons and the future Apples of the world, ensuring that they're thinking about sustainable practices and thinking about diversity from when they're, from basically their genesis, they'll grow into those companies. And so over time, we'll continue to have like more sustainable businesses, better governance, et cetera, et cetera. So that's our thought process with it. Obviously, later stage companies, it's more hands-on. So we help them with their impact reports. We help them with policies they might want to put in. But, it ranges, obviously, the stage of the business and when we're getting in.
Yeah, and I would think the work that you're doing with the Female Leaders Fund probably, and the framework that you develop for that probably contributes to helping your other portfolio companies think about diversity. So you're building an in-house capability that then you can share with companies that are in some of your other funds.
Exactly.
So kind of having that in-house expertise probably contributes across the board.
Yeah, and same thing with climate. Obviously the energy companies, the renewable energy companies are the best at understanding, their impact and where they're getting their materials, and they're thinking about carbon footprint all the time. We can take that and that crosses over to maybe a company that's hasn't started thinking about that yet. So having that cross-pollination is really helpful.
Definitely. I want to dig a little bit into your background because working in VC is so exciting. So many people want to work in venture. So what sort of, based on your own experience, you said, you had kind of a legal background in many ways, international business. What sort of advice would you give to someone who wanted to go into venture on the investing side? And what, I guess, on the other hand, what sort of advice would you give to someone who wants to do a startup?
So I think on the venture side, there's so many ways. I mean, my background is quite generic in terms of business, finance, legal. I understand, the numbers side of things, and I've learnt the technology side. But conversely, you could have come from the technology side and you have a deep understanding of material science. You're going to have a different skill set to me, but the two of us working together will benefit a company. So I don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all for VC. I think that you can go down multiple paths, and I think people should follow what they're interested in, because that's where you'll thrive. And the more that so if you're choosing a degree to get into VC, don't choose a degree because you think that that's what they'll like to see. Choose it because you're passionate about that. That might take you down a path in building, your own startup or something that enables you to get into VC. So I think you can come from so many different backgrounds, that yes, you might have a financial background, but a technical background is just as important. And that might depend on the fund or the firm that you're looking to apply to. So obviously, everybody is going to think they're going to have different things that are important. But I think having a technical engineering background can also be super helpful. And then somebody's trying to start a startup, just go for it. I mean,
I love that. I love that. Just go for it.
There's nothing you're going to learn on the way, get advice, try and network into people who, can be good mentors or advisors, or who can help network you down the road. Work out what you don't know. You're going to know when you're starting a startup, there are so many things to the business and you can never know all the things, like no way. So work out where your gaps are and try and fill those with, people in the network. People are always willing to help, emerging founders. So, reach out to people, ask for advice, have a coffee, but just start. I mean, what's the worst that happens? Like it doesn't work out and then you start another one. So, that's my advice.
Oh, that's excellent, especially after you've seen so many founders. You know what they go through. You're helping them along the way. And I think that for anyone who's interested in going into venture, having that mind who just loves to see all sorts of businesses, and especially in the area that you're focused in, climate and in, equality and healthcare, agriculture. I just think that the people who are involved in these are just so passionate and passionate about the planet. And I guess that leads me to our last question. We always talk about each skill that we have that can contribute to make the world a better place. But if you could take that one step further and think if you had a sustainability superpower, something, that would definitely make the world better, and you can use your imagination, what might that superpower be?
I mean, apart from being like Einstein and being able to solve some of the global problems, at the blink of an eye. I think, and maybe this is kind of an unusual one, but like being a ultra networker. So being able to call anyone in any big corporation in the world, or like being a global networker, ironically, is potentially a sustainability superpower, because you can have a really big impact by connecting a whole lot of small companies to a whole lot of customers, big players. The more companies that you can scale, the more impact that you can have. So if you can create 5 Teslas or 5 Apples, but like if Apple was a renewable energy company, think about the impact that you can have on the world.
Yeah, I love that. And it's right in line with what you do already. You are connecting people already. So you're just taking it to the next level. Well, that's amazing. I love hearing about what you're doing, Ali. You've given me so many ideas for people who come to SoulPods asking, what can I do with my startup idea that is in the area of impact and sustainability? And also for those who are interested in VC. And I really appreciate the time. Thank you for connecting with us today, or I guess it's evening for you. I'm not sure,
No,
but
midday, lunchtime.
okay, lunchtime. Thank you so much. And we look forward to staying in touch and finding out how all of your portfolio companies do that are out changing the world and making it a better place.
Thanks so much, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.